Have you ever had that moment when someone calls you a burden, only to discover you hold the keys to their entire future? When my daughter Clarissa stood in the opulent crystal ballroom of Rosewood Manor and called me a nuisance in front of her future in-laws, demanding I step back from her special day, I didn't argue or plead. I simply smiled, walked to the front desk, and asked the venue coordinator to bring me the ownership papers. The look of absolute horror on Clarissa's face when she realized I didn't just work at the venue, I owned it, told me everything I needed to know about how far our relationship had fallen. But let me start from the beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who would have to prove her worth to her own child. I always believed in unconditional love, in supporting your children's dreams no matter what, in being the soft place they could always land. That's what motherhood is supposed to be, right? But sometimes life has a way of showing you exactly who people become when they think they have all the power, and more importantly, who you are when they try to take yours away. My name is Catherine Winters, though most people in Millbrook Heights know me simply as the woman who built something from nothing. I grew up in the working-class neighborhoods of Cedar Falls, raised by a single mother who cleaned houses to put food on our table. Mom worked her fingers to the bone, scrubbing other people's toilets and organizing their closets, always coming home exhausted but never complaining. She taught me that dignity comes from hard work, not from what others think of you, and that lesson would prove more valuable than any inheritance ever could. I started working at 14, babysitting for the wealthy families whose homes my mother cleaned. Those children had everything I didn't: designer clothes, private tutors, summer camps that cost more than our yearly rent. But I noticed something else. Their parents were often absent, traveling for business or social obligations, leaving their most precious possessions with hired help. That's when I first understood that money and love don't always go hand in hand. After high school, I worked 3 jobs while attending community college at night, studying business administration with a focus on hospitality management. I had a vision that seemed impossible to everyone around me. I wanted to create a space where families could celebrate life's most important moments surrounded by beauty and elegance, regardless of their background. While my classmates dreamed of corporate careers, I dreamed of crystal chandeliers and marble floors, of creating memories that would last generations. By 25, I had saved enough to put a down payment on a rundown Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Millbrook Heights. The previous owners had let it fall into disrepair. The roof leaked, the floors were warped, and the gardens looked like something from a horror movie. But I saw potential where others saw problems. I spent the next 5 years renovating every inch of that property with my own hands, learning plumbing and electrical work, refinishing hardwood floors until my fingers bled, and slowly transforming what everyone called the old eyesore into something magical. That's where I met David Ashford, a local contractor who'd been hired to help with the more complex renovations. He was everything I wasn't: gentle where I was fierce, patient where I was driven, content where I was ambitious. We fell in love among paint cans and construction dust, and when I finally opened Rosewood Manor as Millbrook Heights' premier wedding venue, David was right beside me, handling the grounds while I managed the events. Clarissa was born 3 years later, and from the moment she took her first breath, she was surrounded by beauty. She grew up running through ballrooms where fairy tale weddings took place, hiding behind silk curtains during receptions, and falling asleep to the sound of string quartets. Other children had playgrounds. Clarissa had a mansion with secret passages and gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Maybe that was my first mistake, giving her a childhood so perfect that she began to believe luxury was her birthright, rather than the result of her mother's blood, sweat, and determination. Rosewood Manor became the most sought-after wedding venue in 3 counties. Brides would book us 2 years in advance, and our waiting list grew longer each season. I didn't just create a business. I created an experience, a place where dreams came true and love stories began their next chapter. The revenue allowed me to expand. I purchased 2 adjacent properties, creating outdoor ceremony spaces and additional reception halls. Within a decade, what started as one woman's impossible dream had become a multi-million-dollar empire. But success came with a price. The longer hours, the constant pressure to maintain perfection, the weight of running a business that employed 37 people, it all took its toll. David and I grew apart, not through any dramatic betrayal or explosive fight, but through the slow erosion that happens when 2 people stop making time for each other. Our divorce was amicable, mature, and heartbreaking in its civility. Clarissa, now 16, chose to live with her father in his comfortable suburban home, rather than stay with me in the sprawling manor that had defined her childhood. She said it felt more normal, which stung more than I cared to admit. The palace I'd built for her had become a prison she wanted to escape. Still, I thought we maintained a good relationship. She visited regularly, worked summer jobs at the venue, and seemed proud when her friends' families chose Rosewood Manor for their celebrations. I supported her through college, her study abroad program in Paris, her post-graduation year of finding herself while traveling through Europe. When she announced her engagement to Preston Blackthorne III, son of a prominent banking family from the capital city of Grandview, I was thrilled, not because of his pedigree, but because she seemed genuinely happy. What I didn't anticipate was how Preston's family would view me, or how quickly Clarissa would begin to see herself through their eyes. The Blackthornes were old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to work for anything. Preston's mother, Constance, spoke in the clipped tones of someone who'd attended boarding school since childhood, and his father, Preston Jr., carried himself with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never heard the word no. But I was prepared for their subtle condescension. What I wasn't prepared for was my own daughter joining their ranks, treating me like an embarrassing reminder of humble beginnings she wanted to forget. The first sign came during their engagement party planning. Clarissa insisted on hiring an outside wedding planner despite my decades of experience, claiming she wanted fresh eyes on her special day. When I offered suggestions based on what I'd learned from coordinating over 3,000 weddings, she dismissed them as outdated or too provincial for the Blackthorne standards. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that crisp October morning when she stood in my ballroom, the one I'd designed and built with my own vision and sacrifice, and called me a nuisance, demanding I step aside so the real professionals could handle her wedding. She had no idea that the woman she was dismissing owned every crystal chandelier above her head, every marble tile beneath her feet, and every carefully cultivated rose in the gardens where she planned to say her vows. She was about to learn that respect isn't inherited, it's earned, and sometimes it has to be demanded. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Let me start from the beginning, before the chandeliers and marble floors, before the empire I built became the battleground where my own daughter would try to erase me from her story. I was born Catherine Rose Miller, in a cramped apartment above Murphy's hardware store on Elm Street in Cedar Falls, a town where everyone knew everyone else's business and dreams were luxuries most people couldn't afford. My father left when I was 7, taking nothing but his clothes, and leaving behind a note that said he, quote, wasn't cut out for family life. Mom never spoke ill of him, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes grow deeper each day as she realized she was raising me alone on a house cleaner's wages. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where your last name determined your future. The Weatherbys owned the lumber mill, the Connors ran the bank, and the rest of us worked for them or struggled to get by. I learned early that if you weren't born into the right family, you had to create your own opportunities. While other kids played after school, I was babysitting for the wealthy families on Maple Hill, earning 50 cents an hour to watch children who had more toys than I'd ever seen. Those afternoons in houses that seemed like palaces taught me something profound. Money wasn't just about having nice things, it was about having choices. The mothers who hired me could choose to work or stay home, choose to travel or redecorate, choose to send their children to private schools or summer camps. Meanwhile, my mother had exactly one choice each morning: get up and clean someone else's house, or watch us lose ours. I was 16 when I first saw the old Victorian mansion that would later become Rosewood Manor. It sat on 12 acres at the end of Willowbrook Road, surrounded by overgrown gardens and an air of faded grandeur. The Ashworth family had built it in 1894 as their summer estate, but after 3 generations of neglect, it had become a local eyesore. Windows were boarded up, paint was peeling, and the wraparound porch sagged under the weight of rotting timbers. Mrs. Henderson, one of my mother's clients, mentioned they were finally putting it up for auction. "Be a miracle if anyone could bring that old ruin back to life," she said, shaking her head. But standing there in her pristine kitchen, I found myself sketching ideas on napkins: what the ballroom could look like with proper lighting, how the gardens could be restored to showcase outdoor ceremonies, where the bridal suites could be added to the upper floors. My mother found those sketches that night and sat down beside me at our tiny kitchen table. "You've got vision, Caddy," she said, using the nickname she'd called me since childhood. "But vision without action is just daydreaming. If you want something different than what we have, you're going to have to work harder than anyone expects you to." She was right, and I did. I worked 3 jobs through high school: babysitting after school, cleaning offices on weekends, and serving tables at Murphy's Diner during summer breaks. Every dollar went into a savings account at First National, and I watched those numbers grow with the same intensity other teenagers watched their favorite TV shows. By graduation, I had saved $11,000, more money than my mother had ever seen at one time. College wasn't a given in our family, it was a luxury I'd have to earn. I enrolled in night classes at Cedar Falls Community College, studying business administration while working full-time at the Grandview Hotel as a desk clerk. The hotel was 40 minutes away by bus, but it was the closest thing to hospitality management experience I could find. I observed everything: how the front desk handled difficult guests, how the event coordinators managed weddings and conferences, how the general manager balanced customer satisfaction with profit margins. The hotel manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed my interest and began teaching me the business beyond my job description. She showed me how to read occupancy reports, explained the markup on catering services, and let me shadow the event planning team during their busiest seasons. "You've got an eye for this," she told me after I'd reorganized the storage closet to improve efficiency. "Most people see hospitality as serving others, but you understand it's about creating experiences they can't get anywhere else." Those words became my guiding principle. I wasn't just planning to open another event venue. I was going to create something that would make people feel like the most important versions of themselves. After 2 years of community college, I transferred to State University's hospitality program, taking out student loans that scared me but seemed necessary for the credentials I'd need. I lived in a studio apartment the size of most people's closets, survived on ramen noodles and determination, and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in hotel and restaurant management. The old Ashworth mansion was still sitting empty when I graduated, the asking price having dropped from $400,000 to $180,000 as years of abandonment took their toll. I had saved $47,000, enough for a down payment if I could convince a bank to take a chance on a 24-year-old woman with big dreams and a solid business plan. First National Bank turned me down, so did Grandview Savings and Trust. The loan officers were polite but firm. I was too young, too inexperienced, and the property was too much of a risk. "Maybe look for something smaller to start with," they suggested, missing the point entirely. I didn't want smaller. I wanted to create something extraordinary. It was David Ashford who changed everything. I'd hired him to do a structural assessment of the mansion after the 3rd bank rejection, hoping to find evidence that the building was more sound than it appeared. David was 31, recently divorced, and running his construction company with the quiet competence of someone who'd learned his trade from his grandfather. He spent 3 days examining every beam, pipe, and foundation stone before delivering his verdict. "The bones are solid," he told me, sitting in what had once been the mansion's library. "Victorian craftsmen built things to last. You'll need to rewire completely, replace the plumbing, and restore the exterior, but the foundation and frame are strong enough to support another century of use." More importantly, he believed in my vision. When I explained my plans to transform the mansion into a premier wedding venue, his eyes lit up with the same excitement I felt. "I can see it," he said, nodding slowly. "The grand staircase restored for bridal entrances, the conservatory converted to a cocktail space, the carriage house transformed into a catering kitchen." David offered to co-sign my loan application, putting his own business assets on the line for a woman he'd known for less than a week. Years later, he'd tell me he fell in love with my determination before he fell in love with me. But I think it was simpler than that. He recognized someone who shared his respect for craftsmanship and his belief that beautiful things were worth the effort they required. Millbrook Savings, a smaller local bank, finally approved our application. The day I signed those papers and received the keys to the mansion felt like receiving the keys to my future. Standing in that dusty, damaged ballroom, I could see past the peeling wallpaper and water stains to envision crystal chandeliers casting light on celebrating families, the sound of laughter echoing off restored walls, and couples beginning their married lives surrounded by the kind of beauty that makes ordinary moments feel magical. I had no idea that one day, my own daughter would stand in that same ballroom and dismiss me as an inconvenience to her perfect day. But perhaps that's the price of building something extraordinary. Those who benefit from your sacrifices sometimes forget the hands that built their foundation. The restoration of what would become Rosewood Manor consumed the next 4 years of my life in ways I could never have anticipated. David and I worked 18-hour days, our hands permanently stained with paint, and our conversations revolving around electrical permits and historical preservation requirements. What began as a business partnership evolved into something deeper during those long nights spent refinishing hardwood floors and debating the merits of different chandelier suppliers. David proposed to me in the mansion's garden on a crisp September evening, surrounded by the first roses we'd successfully coaxed back to life. "I want to build this dream with you," he said, presenting a simple solitaire ring that somehow felt more precious than any elaborate diamond could have. Not just the venue, but the life that comes with it. We married 6 months later in what would become our signature ceremony space, the conservatory, with its soaring glass ceiling and restored Victorian ironwork. Our wedding was a test run of sorts, with 43 guests who served as willing guinea pigs for our menu, timing, and logistics. My mother cried when she saw me walk down the makeshift aisle, not just because her daughter was getting married, but because she understood that this moment represented the realization of a dream that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Mrs. Rodriguez from the Grandview Hotel attended as my honored guest, beaming with pride as she surveyed the transformation we'd accomplished. Clarissa was born on a snowy February morning in our 3rd year of operation, arriving 2 weeks early as if she couldn't wait to join the world we'd created. From her first breath, she was surrounded by beauty and celebration. Her nursery overlooked the rose garden, and she fell asleep each night to the distant sounds of string quartets and celebration from the ballrooms below. Other children grew up with cartoon characters on their walls. Clarissa's bedroom featured hand-painted murals of fairy tale castles and enchanted forests. As a toddler, she would toddle through the venue during setup days, charming vendors and staff with her curious questions and infectious laughter. The florists taught her the names of different flowers, the musicians let her play tiny instruments during sound checks, and our catering staff saved special treats for Princess Clarissa, as they affectionately called her. She was everyone's favorite little assistant, always eager to help arrange flowers or test wedding cakes. I thought those early years were magical for her, and they were in many ways. She had experiences most children could only dream of. Private tours of the bridal suites, helping me choose linens for upcoming events, and being the unofficial flower girl at dozens of ceremonies, when couples requested, quote, the venue owner's adorable daughter participate in their special day. Her bedroom overflowed with gifts from grateful brides and grooms, delicate jewelry, miniature perfume bottles, and more stuffed animals than any child could possibly need. But success in the wedding industry meant working when other families were relaxing. While other children had their parents' attention on weekends, Clarissa learned that Saturdays and Sundays belonged to other people's celebrations. During peak wedding season, May through October, I was often too exhausted to read bedtime stories or help with homework. David tried to compensate by taking her on special adventures during our rare free time, but I could see the pattern developing. Mommy was always working, always stressed, always prioritizing other people's happiness over her own family's needs. The venue's success exceeded our wildest projections. By Clarissa's 5th birthday, we were booked solid 18 months in advance, with a waiting list that grew longer each season. Couples traveled from 3 states away to hold their weddings at Rosewood Manor, drawn by our reputation for flawless execution and breathtaking photography opportunities. Wedding magazines featured our venues regularly, and I was invited to speak at hospitality industry conferences about our transformation from abandoned mansion to premier destination. With success came expansion. We purchased the adjacent Thompson property, adding outdoor ceremony spaces that could accommodate larger guest lists. The old barn was converted into a rustic reception hall for couples seeking a more casual atmosphere, while the farmhouse became additional bridal party preparation suites. A second acquisition, the historic Millbrook Chapel 2 miles down the road, provided a ceremonial option for couples who wanted a traditional church wedding followed by reception festivities at the manor. Revenue grew from 6 figures to 7 figures, and suddenly we weren't just successful, we were wealthy. David and I found ourselves making decisions about trust funds and investment portfolios, concepts that had seemed as foreign as space travel during my Cedar Falls childhood. We hired a business manager, an accountant, and eventually a marketing firm to handle the increasing demands of running what had become a hospitality empire. But Clarissa's childhood changed, along with our circumstances. She no longer toddled through setup areas. Instead, she attended private school with children whose families could afford Rosewood Manor's premium pricing. Her friends' parents were doctors, lawyers, and executives who lived in Millbrook Heights' most exclusive neighborhoods. Playdates happened in houses that rivaled our venue in size and elegance, and Clarissa began comparing our family's lifestyle to theirs. The shift was subtle at first. She started questioning why we lived at work instead of in a regular house like her friends. She complained that our dinner conversations always centered on upcoming events and vendor problems, instead of the family vacations and weekend activities her classmates enjoyed. When I tried to involve her in the business as she grew older, she showed more interest in the glamorous aspects, the designer gowns, expensive floral arrangements, and elaborate receptions, than in the careful planning and hard work that made those moments possible. School events became particularly challenging. While other mothers could attend daytime field trips and volunteer for classroom activities, I was often managing site visits for potential clients or handling crisis management for weekend events. Parent-teacher conferences had to be scheduled around our booking calendar, and Clarissa's spring dance recital conflicted with our busiest wedding weekend of the year. David attended alone while I coordinated 3 simultaneous receptions, a decision that still haunts me when I remember the disappointment in my 8-year-old daughter's eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had created a business dedicated to celebrating families and love, yet my own family was struggling under the weight of that success. David and I rarely had time for romantic dinners or spontaneous getaways. Our conversations focused on profit margins and staffing challenges rather than shared dreams and future plans. We were building something extraordinary together, but slowly losing each other in the process. Clarissa adapted by becoming remarkably self-sufficient. She learned to entertain herself during the long hours when both parents were working, developing friendships with our staff members, who often provided more consistent attention than David or I could manage. Maria, our head housekeeper, taught her Spanish while they organized linens. James, our grounds supervisor, showed her how to identify different plants and insects in the gardens. Chef Antoine let her help with food preparation during slower periods, teaching her basic cooking skills and patience. In many ways, she was growing up in a loving, extended family of employees who adored her. But I began to notice a shift in how she spoke about our business. Instead of saying, "Mommy and Daddy's venue," she started referring to it as, "the place where we live." Instead of proudly telling friends about our awards and magazine features, she began making excuses for why our family was always busy during weekends and holidays. The first real crack in our relationship appeared during her 10th birthday party. Clarissa had requested a simple celebration at home, just family and a few close friends. But that weekend coincided with the elaborate wedding of a governor's daughter, complete with security details and media restrictions that required my constant oversight. I tried to manage both events simultaneously, running between her birthday gathering and the high-profile reception happening 2 floors below. The breaking point came when I missed her blowing out the candles because I was resolving a crisis with the wedding photographer who had been denied access by overzealous security personnel. When I returned to find the cake already cut and presents partially opened, Clarissa looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger or disappointment, but resignation. At 10 years old, she had already learned that her mother's attention would always be divided, that other people's celebrations would always take priority over her own needs. That night, after the governor's daughter was safely married and our exhausted staff had finished cleanup, I found Clarissa in her room, carefully putting away birthday gifts she'd opened without me. "Did you have a good party, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice despite my exhaustion. She looked up at me with David's serious brown eyes and said simply, "It was fine, Mommy. I understand you have important work to do." But her tone suggested she understood more than a 10-year-old should have to understand about sacrifice and priorities and the complex balance between building dreams and nurturing the people who matter most. I realized then that in creating a perfect venue for other families' celebrations, I was slowly losing the most important celebration of all, the everyday moments that build lasting relationships with the people we love most. The cracks that began with Clarissa's 10th birthday party widened over the following years, though I was too caught up in the relentless demands of running Rosewood Manor to recognize the pattern developing before my eyes. What I saw as temporary sacrifices for our family's future, Clarissa began to experience as permanent displacement from her mother's priorities. High school brought new challenges that I was woefully unprepared to navigate. Clarissa enrolled at Millbrook Heights Academy, an exclusive private school where her classmates included children of politicians, tech entrepreneurs, and generational wealth families. These weren't just rich kids. They were the sons and daughters of people who understood how to wield influence, how to open doors with phone calls, and how to maintain social positions that had been carefully cultivated over decades. For the first time, Clarissa was surrounded by peers whose family wealth dwarfed ours, despite Rosewood Manor's success. The Pemberton family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Northeast. The Ashfords, no relation to David, controlled a media empire that included 3 major newspapers and 2 television stations. The Morrison twins were heirs to a pharmaceutical fortune that put their family compound in Martha's Vineyard and their private jet at the center of teenage conversations about spring break destinations I'd never even heard of. Initially, I was proud that our success allowed Clarissa to attend such a prestigious institution. The education was exceptional, the connections valuable, and the opportunities endless for a motivated student. What I failed to anticipate was how these new friendships would reshape her perception of our family's lifestyle and my role in maintaining it. The first sign came during her sophomore year, when she asked if we could hire a full-time personal assistant like her friend Priscilla's family had done. "It would help you manage everything better, Mom," she explained reasonably. Priscilla's mom says successful people delegate the details so they can focus on what really matters. The implications stung, that I was somehow failing to focus on what really mattered, because I was still handling vendor negotiations and crisis management myself. I tried to explain that hands-on management was part of what made Rosewood Manor special, that our personal attention to detail was what separated us from corporate event venues and hotel chains. But Clarissa had already absorbed a different philosophy from her new social circle, that truly successful people didn't dirty their hands with operational details, that visible work was somehow beneath those who had made it to the next level. Her friend circle began spending time at our venue, not because they were impressed by what we'd built, but because they found it amusing to have access to a real castle for their social media posts and casual hangouts. They would arrive in chauffeur-driven cars, treat our staff like invisible servants, and leave messes for other people to clean up. I watched my daughter adopt their casual entitlement, the way they expected doors to open and problems to disappear without considering who was doing the actual work behind the scenes. The social dynamics became more complex during Clarissa's junior year when she began dating Blake Harrison, whose father owned the largest commercial real estate firm in the state. Blake was handsome, charming, and possessed the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or consequences. He treated Clarissa like a princess, which should have made me happy, but there was something in his manner that suggested he saw her as an acquisition rather than a person to genuinely know and love. Blake's family owned a summer estate in the Hamptons, a ski lodge in Vermont, and a penthouse apartment in Manhattan that they used for quote, business entertaining. When they invited Clarissa to join them for a long weekend in the Hamptons, I was initially pleased that she was forming connections with such an established family. The photos she posted from that trip showed her fitting seamlessly into their world of yacht clubs and exclusive beach resorts, looking more sophisticated and polished than I'd ever seen her. But when she returned, something had shifted in her demeanor toward me and our life at Rosewood Manor. She criticized the way I dressed for business meetings, suggesting I needed to hire a stylist to elevate my image. She questioned why we didn't have a winter home somewhere warmer, like Blake's family did. Most painfully, she began referring to our venue as Mom's little business when talking to her friends, as if minimizing its scope would somehow make our family's working-class origins less obvious. The Harrison family's influence on Clarissa became more pronounced as her relationship with Blake deepened. Mrs. Harrison, Bitsy, as she insisted I call her, was a former debutante who had perfected the art of gracious condescension. She would compliment our venue's charming rustic appeal in a tone that suggested we were playing dress-up with real elegance. She praised my entrepreneurial spirit, while making it clear that truly refined families didn't engage in commercial enterprises that required such hands-on involvement. During Clarissa's senior year, Blake's family hosted a charity gala at their country club to raise funds for underprivileged children's education. They invited me to attend as a potential donor, and I was eager to support the cause while meeting more of their social circle. I wore my best cocktail dress and arrived prepared to write a generous check for what seemed like a worthy organization. The evening was a revelation in ways I hadn't expected. The gala was beautifully executed, but I recognized immediately that the event planning was far inferior to what we provided at Rosewood Manor. The flowers were generic, the catering mediocre, and the entertainment uninspired. Yet the Harrison family received endless praise for their exquisite taste and sophisticated event management, despite having simply written checks to hire vendors who delivered subpar results. More troubling was watching Clarissa navigate the social dynamics of the evening. She had clearly studied the other young women's behavior, the way they held their champagne flutes, the topics they discussed, even the rhythm of their laughter during conversations. She was performing a version of herself that bore little resemblance to the curious, creative child who had once helped me arrange flowers and taste test wedding cakes. When someone asked about her family background, I heard her describe me as someone who manages events rather than as the owner and creator of the most successful wedding venue in 3 states. The casual dismissal of my achievements stung, but what hurt more was recognizing that she was genuinely embarrassed by the scope and visibility of my work. The final revelation came during her graduation party, which the Harrison family insisted on hosting at their estate. I had offered to cater the event through Rosewood Manor, excited to showcase our capabilities for Clarissa's friends and their families. But Bitsy politely declined, explaining that they preferred to use their regular caterers, who understood their particular standards. The party was lovely, but again, I could see the missed opportunities and lack of attention to detail that my years of experience would have caught and corrected. The timing was off, the food presentation uninspired, and the entertainment failed to engage guests across different age groups. Yet Clarissa glowed throughout the evening, basking in the approval of a social circle that valued pedigree over performance, connections over capability. Watching her that night, I realized that my daughter had learned to see success through an entirely different lens than the one that had motivated my life's work. Where I measured achievement through the satisfaction of clients, the loyalty of employees, and the tangible growth of what we'd built together, Clarissa had absorbed the Harrison family's belief that true success was measured by how far you could distance yourself from the actual work required to maintain your lifestyle. The girl who had once delighted in helping me choose linens and arrange seating charts now saw those activities as beneath her aspirations. The venue that had provided her with every advantage and opportunity was becoming, in her mind, an embarrassing reminder of our commercial background, rather than a testament to what determination and vision could accomplish. As she prepared to leave for college at an Ivy League university, tuition paid for by Rosewood Manor's success, I wondered if I had worked so hard to give her opportunities that I'd inadvertently raised her to look down on the very work that made those opportunities possible. The pattern was now impossible to ignore. Each step up the social ladder seemed to require leaving another piece of our authentic selves behind. College provided a temporary reprieve from the growing tension between Clarissa and me, though distance only masked the deeper issues rather than resolving them. She thrived at Princeton, majoring in art history with a minor in European studies, surrounded by classmates who shared her newfound appreciation for refinement and cultural sophistication. Our weekly phone calls became increasingly superficial. Discussions about her coursework, social events, and study abroad plans, but little of the genuine connection we'd once shared. During her junior year abroad in Florence, she met Preston Blackthorne III at an exclusive gallery opening hosted by the American Embassy. Preston was completing his MBA at Harvard while spending a semester studying international finance in Italy. Their courtship unfolded against the backdrop of Renaissance palazzos and Tuscan vineyards, a romance that seemed lifted from the pages of a travel magazine. The photos she sent showed them attending opera premieres, dining at restaurants I'd only seen featured in luxury travel publications, and exploring art collections in private villas owned by Preston's family connections. When they returned to the States, Preston immediately integrated into our family dynamics, though his presence shifted the atmosphere in subtle but unmistakable ways. He was unfailingly polite to me, addressing me as Mrs. Winters, with the kind of formal respect that somehow felt more distancing than endearing. He complimented Rosewood Manor's impressive transformation from its original state, as if acknowledging that we'd managed to overcome the disadvantage of our humble origins through considerable effort. Preston's background was everything Clarissa had been unconsciously preparing for through her years at Millbrook Heights Academy. The Blackthorne family had been prominent in Grandview society for 4 generations, their wealth originally built through banking and investments, but now maintained through trust funds and strategic philanthropy. Preston's father served on multiple corporate boards without actively managing any companies, while his mother devoted her time to charitable organizations that provided excellent networking opportunities with other established families. Their engagement announcement in the Grandview Herald emphasized Preston's Harvard MBA and family lineage, while describing Clarissa as daughter of local businesswoman Catherine Winters. The phrase stung with its casual dismissal of everything I'd built, reducing 2 decades of industry leadership to a generic business reference. But Clarissa seemed pleased with the write-up, particularly the photo of her displaying her engagement ring at the Blackthorne family's annual Christmas party, a 3-carat diamond that had belonged to Preston's great-grandmother. The Blackthorne family's approach to wedding planning revealed the vast difference between their understanding of event management and mine. Constance Blackthorne, Preston's mother, immediately took charge of coordinating what she called the social event of the season, treating Clarissa more like a beautiful accessory to be properly showcased than a bride with personal preferences and vision. Their first family meeting about wedding plans took place at the Blackthorne estate in Grandview, a Georgian mansion that had been featured in Architectural Digest twice over the past decade. I arrived prepared to discuss venue options, catering preferences, and timeline considerations, the practical elements that would ensure a flawless celebration. Instead, I found myself listening to Constance describe her vision for an event that would properly introduce Clarissa to Grandview society, while establishing the young couple's position within their social hierarchy. "We'll need at least 400 guests," Constance announced, consulting notes written on monogrammed stationery. The governor and his wife, of course, plus the mayor and city council members. The university trustees should be included, along with the country club board and the hospital foundation leadership. This wedding represents more than just a personal celebration. It's Preston's formal introduction as the next generation of Blackthorne leadership. I listened with growing concern as she outlined plans that seemed more focused on social positioning than on celebrating Clarissa and Preston's relationship. The guest list included hundreds of people Clarissa had never met. The menu was dictated by what Constance considered, quote, appropriately sophisticated rather than the couple's preferences, and even the floral arrangements were chosen to photograph well for the society pages rather than to reflect any personal meaning. When I finally spoke up to suggest that we consider what would make Clarissa happiest on her wedding day, Constance's smile became strained. "Of course we want Clarissa to be happy," she said in a tone that suggested my comment was naive. "But weddings of this caliber require careful orchestration to ensure everything reflects the family's standards. I'm sure you understand that this is quite different from the more casual celebrations you're accustomed to managing." The dismissal was polite, but unmistakable. In Constance's worldview, the weddings I'd coordinated, despite their elegance, attention to detail, and client satisfaction, were somehow inferior because they served people who had to work for their money rather than inherit it. She saw my professional experience as a limitation rather than an asset, evidence of our family's commercial background rather than proof of my expertise. Clarissa remained notably silent during these exchanges, neither defending my qualifications nor challenging her future mother-in-law's assumptions. I watched her absorb Constance's subtle corrections about everything from invitation wording to reception timelines, accepting guidance that contradicted years of experience I'd gained through managing thousands of successful events. The venue selection process became the first major battleground. Constance had already identified 3 appropriate locations: the Grandview Country Club, the historic Pemberton Hotel, and the Governor's Mansion Gardens. Each venue came with the kind of social credentials she valued: exclusive membership requirements, historical significance, or political connections that would impress their guest list. When I suggested that we consider Rosewood Manor, the silence that followed felt deafening. Constance's eyebrows rose slightly, as if I'd proposed holding the ceremony in a barn rather than in one of the most sought-after wedding venues in 3 states. "Oh, Catherine," she said with the kind of pitying smile reserved for well-meaning but misguided suggestions. "That's such a sweet offer, but we really need something with the proper pedigree for an event of this magnitude." Clarissa's face flushed, though whether from embarrassment about the suggestion or anger at her future mother-in-law's dismissal, I couldn't tell. Preston cleared his throat diplomatically. Rosewood Manor has an excellent reputation, he said carefully. But Mother has valid concerns about capacity and the social expectations surrounding our wedding. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I sat there processing the casual dismissal of everything I'd built. Rosewood Manor had hosted weddings for senators, tech billionaires, and entertainment industry executives. We'd been featured in magazines, won industry awards, and maintained a waiting list that extended 2 years into the future. Yet because I had built this success through my own work rather than inheriting it, because I still personally managed operations rather than delegating everything to hired staff, the venue was somehow unsuitable for Clarissa's wedding. The real blow came 3 weeks later when Clarissa called to inform me that they'd selected the Pemberton Hotel for the ceremony and reception. "It's just easier this way, Mom," she explained, her voice carrying a note of apology that somehow made the rejection worse. "Constance has connections there that will simplify the planning process, and Preston's family has hosted events there for years." I wanted to point out that easier usually meant accepting inferior service and paying premium prices for the convenience of established relationships rather than earned excellence. I wanted to remind her of the dozens of compliments she'd received over the years from friends whose families had chosen Rosewood Manor for their celebrations. I wanted to ask when my daughter had decided that my life's work wasn't good enough for her most important day. Instead, I said, "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever makes you happiest." But as I hung up the phone, I realized that making Clarissa happy had somehow become synonymous with erasing my contributions to her life. The venue that had provided her with every advantage, the business that had paid for her education and travel experiences, the work that had taught her to appreciate beauty and attention to detail, all of it was now an embarrassment to be politely set aside in favor of social acceptability. The pattern that had begun during her high school years was now complete. My daughter had learned to see my greatest achievements as limitations to overcome, rather than foundations to build upon. And I was about to discover that this was only the beginning of how thoroughly she was prepared to write me out of her perfect narrative. The Pemberton Hotel decision marked the beginning of what I can only describe as my systematic exclusion from Clarissa's wedding planning process. Over the following months, I watched from the sidelines as Constance orchestrated every detail with military precision, treating me like a well-meaning relative whose input was politely acknowledged but ultimately irrelevant to the serious business of social positioning. Wedding planning meetings took place at the Blackthorn Estate, or the Country Club, locations that required an hour's drive from Rosewood Manor and seemed deliberately chosen to emphasize my outsider status. When I did attend, my suggestions were met with patient smiles and gentle redirections toward whatever Constance had already decided. My decades of experience managing flawless events became irrelevant compared to her knowledge of what would photograph well for the society pages and impress the right people on their guest list. The vendor selection process was particularly painful to witness. Constance dismissed florists I'd worked with for years, in favor of someone who charged triple our rates but had the correct social credentials. The caterer she chose specialized in elaborate presentations that looked stunning, but sacrificed flavor for visual impact, exactly the kind of prioritizing form over substance that I'd spent 20 years teaching couples to avoid. When I gently mentioned these concerns, Clarissa assured me that Constance knows what she's doing, with a tone that suggested my professional judgment was somehow less reliable than her future mother-in-law's social connections. The dress shopping expedition became another exercise in exclusion disguised as inclusion. Constance arranged a private appointment at Grandview's most exclusive bridal boutique, inviting only her daughter Penelope, her sister-in-law Margaret, and me. I arrived excited to share this milestone moment with Clarissa, remembering how we'd once bonded over fashion magazines and dreamed about her future wedding dress during her teenage years. The boutique was everything I'd expected: pristine white carpets, crystal chandeliers, and gowns that cost more than most people's cars. But the atmosphere felt more like a board meeting than a celebration. Constance had already pre-selected 5 dresses, based on what would photograph appropriately and suit the formality of the venue. Each dress was undeniably beautiful, but they all shared a similar conservative elegance that seemed more focused on projecting the right image than expressing Clarissa's personality. I watched my daughter try on dress after dress while Constance provided commentary about necklines, train lengths, and how each option would coordinate with the Blackthorn family jewelry she'd be wearing. When Clarissa emerged in a stunning but rather severe creation that Constance immediately proclaimed perfect, I couldn't help but speak up. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said carefully, "but does it feel like you? Remember how you always loved that flowing, romantic style we admired in those magazines?" I was thinking of the hours we'd spent during her teenage years, poring over bridal publications and discussing her dream wedding aesthetic, something softer, more whimsical, with delicate lace details and flowing fabric that would move beautifully in photographs. The silence that followed felt charged with tension. Constance's expression remained pleasant, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Catherine, dear," she said with the kind of patient tone reserved for correcting a child, "flowing styles can be lovely for more casual ceremonies, but this wedding requires appropriate formality. We want Clarissa to look sophisticated, not whimsical." Clarissa's reflections stared back at us from the three-way mirror, but she seemed to be looking through herself rather than at herself. "Constance is right," she said finally. "This is more appropriate for the kind of wedding we're planning." But her voice lacked the excitement that should accompany finding the perfect dress, and I noticed she avoided making eye contact with me in the mirror. The final insult came when Constance suggested that the boutique manager record the fitting session, quote, "for documentation purposes." As I watched my daughter being pinned and measured while dutifully accepting praise for how refined she looked, I realized that even this intimate mother-daughter moment had been transformed into a performance for Constance's approval rather than a genuine celebration of Clarissa's choices. The breaking point arrived on a humid Tuesday morning in July, exactly 8 weeks before the wedding date. I had driven to Rosewood Manor early to handle vendor deliveries for that weekend's events when I noticed an unfamiliar silver Mercedes in our parking area. The car bore Virginia plates and looked expensive even by our clientele's standards, the kind of vehicle that suggested serious money rather than just success. I found the car's occupants in our main ballroom, Constance Blackthorn, accompanied by a thin, immaculately dressed woman I didn't recognize, both taking photographs and making notes while walking through our signature ceremony space. They were measuring distances, examining sight lines, and discussing logistics with the focused attention of people conducting serious business. "Constance," I called out, surprised but attempting to maintain professional courtesy. "What a pleasant surprise. Are you here to see the venue after all?" She turned toward me with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, clearly caught in an awkward situation she hadn't anticipated. "Catherine, how lovely to see you. This is my dear friend Vivian Ashworth from Richmond. She owns several boutique event venues and was curious to see your establishment." The pause before establishment was barely perceptible, but it conveyed volumes about how she truly viewed what I'd built. I extended my hand to Vivian, who shook it with the brief, limp grasp of someone fulfilling a social obligation rather than expressing genuine interest in meeting me. "I was just showing Vivian around," Constance continued smoothly. "She's considering expanding her business into this region and wanted to assess the local competition. Something about their behavior felt wrong. The careful measurements, the detailed photographs, the way they'd position themselves as if evaluating space for specific purposes rather than conducting a casual tour. These weren't the actions of someone making polite conversation about regional business opportunities. "Are you planning an event here?" I asked directly, tired of dancing around whatever was really happening. Constance exchanged a glance with Vivian before answering. "Not exactly an event, dear, but we are exploring some possibilities that might benefit everyone involved." Before I could ask for clarification, my phone rang with Clarissa's name on the caller ID. I stepped away to take the call but remained close enough to observe their continued examination of our space. Mom, Clarissa's voice sounded strained, though she was clearly attempting casual conversation. I wanted to let you know that we've decided to add a welcome party the night before the wedding. Just something small and intimate for the wedding party and immediate family. That sounds lovely, I replied, though I was distracted by watching Constance take photographs of our catering prep areas. Where are you planning to hold it? Well, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. Constance suggested that Rosewood Manor might be appropriate for something more casual, like a rehearsal dinner. She thought it would be a nice way to include your venue in our celebration after all. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a generous gesture or a change of heart about my venue's suitability. This was a strategic decision to use Rosewood Manor for the less important, preliminary event while reserving the real wedding for a venue with proper social credentials. They wanted to throw me a bone. Let me host the casual gathering that wouldn't matter for their social positioning, while keeping the significant celebrations somewhere that would impress their important guests. I see, I said slowly, watching Constance gesture toward our outdoor ceremony space while explaining something to Vivian. And when were you planning to discuss this arrangement with me? I'm discussing it with you now, Clarissa replied, though her tone suggested she heard the edge in my voice. I thought you'd be happy to be included in our celebration. Included, as if hosting the rehearsal dinner was a generous concession rather than a calculated insult. As if 20 years of building one of the region's premier wedding venues had earned me the privilege of handling the event that didn't matter while my own daughter celebrated her actual wedding somewhere else. Clarissa, I said carefully, is your future mother-in-law currently in my ballroom taking photographs and measurements? The silence on the other end of the line confirmed what I already knew. Mom, I can explain. Actually, I interrupted, I think the situation is quite clear. You've decided that Rosewood Manor is suitable for hosting your rehearsal dinner, but not dignified enough for your actual wedding. And Constance is here conducting reconnaissance to ensure our little venue meets her standards for the lesser event. It's not like that, Clarissa protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The rehearsal dinner is important too. We just thought... You thought you'd pacify me by letting me host the practice round, while saving the real celebration for people who matter. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I was past the point of diplomatic responses. I could hear Clarissa's sharp intake of breath through the phone. Mom, you're being unfair. We're trying to include you in our wedding celebrations, and you're making it sound like some kind of insult. Because it is an insult, sweetheart. I watched Constance point out architectural details to Vivian, while they stood in the space where I'd hosted hundreds of couples' most important moments. You've decided that the venue that built your college fund and paid for your European adventures isn't good enough for your wedding day, but it's acceptable for a casual dinner party. You're asking me to feel grateful for being assigned the consolation prize. That's not, Clarissa began, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. She was beginning to understand how her generous offer actually sounded when stated plainly. Let me ask you something, Clarissa. When you bring your children here someday and they ask about Grandma's work, what will you tell them? That I built something beautiful and successful, but not quite beautiful or successful enough for their mother's wedding day? The question hung between us for a long moment before Clarissa's voice came back, smaller and more defensive than before. You're being dramatic, Mom. It's just a wedding venue. It doesn't define your worth as a person. Just a wedding venue. 20 years of my life's work, dismissed as just anything. Standing in the ballroom, where I'd watched thousands of couples begin their married lives, where I'd created countless perfect moments through attention to every detail, I felt something inside me finally snap. Just a wedding venue. The words echoed in my mind as I hung up the phone, watching Constance and her friend continue their assessment of my property as if I weren't standing 20 feet away. 20 years of building something extraordinary, and my own daughter had just reduced it to just anything. But instead of the rage or heartbreak I might have expected, I felt something else entirely. a cold, crystalline clarity that I hadn't experienced since those early days of fighting for bank loans and building permits. I walked calmly toward Constance and Vivian, my footsteps echoing in the ballroom that had hosted governors, celebrities, and captains of industry, people who understood the difference between inherited status and earned excellence. They looked up as I approached, Constance's expression shifting from surprise to mild concern as she registered something new in my demeanor. "Ladies," I said with a smile that felt different than any I'd worn in recent months, "I hope you're finding everything you need for your evaluation. Though I should mention that Rosewood Manor's calendar is quite full through the rest of the year. We're booked solid with couples who specifically chose us over other venues, including several who left deposits at the Pemberton Hotel after touring both facilities." Constance's perfectly composed expression flickered slightly. "Catherine, dear, I think there may be some misunderstanding." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted gently. "You're assessing whether our venue meets your standards for Clarissa's rehearsal dinner. I assume you'll want to inspect the catering facilities, wine cellar, and bridal preparation suites as well, since attention to detail is so important for events that reflect family values." The emphasis on family values wasn't lost on either woman. Vivian looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that she'd been brought into a family conflict disguised as a business tour. Constance, however, maintained her composure with the skill of someone accustomed to navigating delicate social situations. "We're simply exploring options," Constance said carefully. "Nothing has been finalized." "Of course not," I agreed pleasantly. "These decisions require careful consideration. After all, the rehearsal dinner sets the tone for the entire wedding weekend. Guests will form their first impressions of the celebration based on that initial experience." I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar app, studying it with the focused attention of someone solving a complex puzzle. "You know, it's interesting. The weekend you've selected for Clarissa's wedding is one of our premium dates. We typically book those 18 months in advance, but I held August 15th specifically for Clarissa, assuming she might want to consider Rosewood Manor for her ceremony." Constance's eyebrows rose slightly. "You held the date?" "Naturally, she's my daughter, and this venue has been her second home since childhood. I couldn't risk having that particular weekend unavailable if she decided our family property was suitable for her celebration." I paused, letting the implications settle. Of course, since she's chosen the Pemberton Hotel instead, I should probably release that date to other couples on our waiting list. "Now, Catherine," Constance began, but I continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The Morrison family has been hoping for an August date for their daughter's wedding. Tech fortune, lovely people, guest list of about 300. They specifically requested our venue after attending the governor's daughter's reception here last spring. I made a show of considering my options. Though I suppose if Clarissa did want the rehearsal dinner here, I could accommodate a smaller Friday evening event and still honor the Morrison booking for Saturday." The subtle message was clear. Rosewood Manor was in demand among families whose social standing rivaled or exceeded the Blackthorns, and I had other options besides serving as a consolation prize for Clarissa's wedding weekend. Vivian cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps I should wait in the car while you finish your family discussion." "Oh, please don't leave on my account," I said warmly. "I'd hate for your trip to be wasted. Would you like to see our award-winning wine cellar? We were featured in Wine Spectator last month for our collection and climate control system." As I led them toward the wine cellar, I began what could only be described as the most strategic tour of my career. Every detail I highlighted, every achievement I mentioned, every unique feature I showcased served a dual purpose, demonstrating the caliber of venue Clarissa had rejected, while subtly reminding Constance that my little business operated at a level that might surprise her. "Our sommelier trained in France and manages a collection worth over $200,000, I explained casually as we descended into the temperature-controlled cellar. We're one of only 3 venues in the state certified to store wines requiring this level of climate precision. The technology ensures that even the most delicate vintages maintain their integrity throughout events. Vivian, despite her obvious discomfort with the family dynamics, couldn't hide her professional interest. "This is quite impressive," she admitted. "Most venues struggle to maintain proper wine storage conditions." "Experience teaches you what matters," I replied. "After hosting over 3,000 weddings, you learn to anticipate needs that other venues might overlook. For instance, our bridal suites include humidity controls to prevent fabric damage during preparation, and our catering kitchens are designed with separate prep areas for different dietary restrictions, essential when you're serving guests with serious allergies or cultural requirements." Constance remained silent, but I could see her mental calculations at work. She was beginning to understand that dismissing Rosewood Manor as somehow inferior might have been a miscalculation based on assumptions rather than facts. We continued through the venue, and I made sure to point out features that would be particularly relevant to their social circle. The private entrance that allowed high-profile guests to avoid photographers. The soundproofing that enabled multiple simultaneous events without interference. The backup power systems that ensured seamless service even during weather emergencies. The senator's daughter was particularly pleased with our security protocols, I mentioned as we toured the grounds. When you're hosting guests who require discretion, these details become essential rather than optional. By the time we returned to the main ballroom, I had systematically demonstrated that every assumption about Rosewood Manor's capabilities or social standing had been based on prejudice rather than facts. More importantly, I had reminded myself of exactly what I'd built and why it deserved respect. "Well," Constance said finally, "this has been quite educational." "I'm glad you found it worthwhile," I replied. Now, regarding Clarissa's rehearsal dinner, I should mention that our Friday evening rates for August are premium pricing, given the demand for summer weekend events. The package she'd need, including cocktail reception, seated dinner for 50, and coordination services, typically runs about $18,000. The figure was twice what most venues would charge for a rehearsal dinner, but it was consistent with our actual pricing for premium dates, and would serve as a reality check for anyone who thought they were doing me a favor by offering to use my services. Constance's composure finally cracked slightly. $18,000 for a rehearsal dinner? For a Friday evening event during our peak season, yes. That includes full-service coordination, premium bar package, 5-course plated dinner, floral centerpieces, and exclusive use of the venue from 4 to midnight. We don't offer reduced rates for family members, as that would be unfair to our other clients who pay full price for the same level of service. I watched her process this information, realizing that her assumption about getting a family discount had been as unfounded as her other prejudices about my business practices. "Of course," I continued smoothly, "if Clarissa prefers something less formal, I could recommend several other venues that might better suit your budget and expectations. The country club has a nice private dining room, and I believe the Pemberton Hotel offers rehearsal dinner packages starting around $4,000. The comparison was deliberate and devastating. I was positioning Rosewood Manor as the premium option while suggesting that their actual choice, the Pemberton Hotel, was the budget alternative. After spending months defending my venue's worthiness, I was now making them question whether they deserved access to what I offered. Constance straightened her shoulders, recognizing the shift in dynamics. "I think we need to discuss this with Preston and Clarissa before making any decisions." "Absolutely," I agreed. "These are important choices that deserve careful consideration by everyone involved. Please do let me know by Friday if you'd like to move forward with the rehearsal dinner booking. I'd hate for the Morrison family to miss out on their preferred date if we're holding it unnecessarily." As they prepared to leave, Vivian shook my hand with genuine respect. "Mrs. Winters, your venue is truly exceptional. Whoever books that August date will be very fortunate." "Thank you," I replied warmly. "That's exactly what we strive for, making every couple feel fortunate to celebrate here." After they left, I stood alone in my ballroom, surrounded by the beauty I'd created through 2 decades of relentless work and unwavering vision. For months, I'd allowed other people's opinions to make me question my own worth. I'd accepted the role of grateful supplicant, begging for inclusion in my own daughter's celebration. That version of Catherine Winters was gone. The woman who remained was the one who had transformed an abandoned mansion into an empire, who had built something so extraordinary that families traveled across states to celebrate here, who had created beauty and meaning from nothing but determination and dreams. If Clarissa wanted to reject what I'd built, that was her choice, but she would do so understanding exactly what she was turning away from and at full price. The phone call came at 11:30 that same night, jerking me from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. Clarissa's name flashed on my screen, and I could hear the tension in her voice before she even spoke. "Mom, we need to talk." No greeting, no pleasantries. Just the tone of someone who'd spent hours being lectured about a problem they needed to solve immediately. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, sitting up in bed and turning on the lamp. "What's on your mind?" "Constance called me after her visit to Rosewood Manor today. She said you were difficult during their tour. She's concerned about moving forward with the rehearsal dinner if you're going to be hostile toward our vendors and family members." I took a moment to process this interpretation of events. Somehow, my professional presentation of our venue's capabilities and pricing had been transformed into hostility toward Constance's presumed authority over my business decisions. "I'm sorry she felt that way," I said carefully. "I thought I was simply providing the same comprehensive tour and pricing information I give to all potential clients." "Did she mention which aspects of our discussions seemed difficult to her?" "Mom, don't play innocent. She said you quoted an outrageous price for the rehearsal dinner, $18,000 for a simple family meal. That's more than some people spend on their entire wedding." "It's the standard rate for a Friday evening event during peak season," I replied calmly. "Premium dates command premium pricing, which is why couples typically book 18 months in advance. I can provide you with our published rate schedule if you'd like to review the breakdown." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Clarissa spoke again, her voice carried a note of desperation I hadn't heard since her teenage years. "Mom, please, can't you just work with us on this? We're family. Surely there's some flexibility in your pricing for your own daughter's wedding events." There it was. The assumption that had been lurking beneath every conversation we'd had about the wedding. Despite rejecting Rosewood Manor for her actual ceremony, despite treating my professional expertise as inferior to Constance's social connections, Clarissa still expected family privileges when it came to accessing my services. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "let me ask you something. When you chose the Pemberton Hotel over Rosewood Manor for your wedding ceremony, did you expect them to offer you a family discount because Preston's family has hosted events there before?" "That's different," she protested. "That's about social connections, not family relationships." "Exactly. And my business relationships are about professional standards, not family obligations. Every couple who books Rosewood Manor pays the same rates for the same services. That's how I've built a reputation for excellence and fairness over 20 years. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like Preston's voice in the background, offering suggestions she clearly didn't want to hear. "So you're saying no," she said finally. "You're saying no to your own daughter's rehearsal dinner because we can't afford your premium pricing." The manipulation in her tone was so transparent it almost made me smile. This was the same child who had once tried to negotiate later bedtimes by claiming all her friends had different rules, the teenager who had attempted to justify expensive purchases by insisting they were investments in her social development. "I'm saying that if you'd like to book Rosewood Manor for your rehearsal dinner, our standard terms apply. Premium date, premium pricing, payment schedule as outlined in our contracts. The same terms that apply to every other client who chooses to celebrate here." "But Mom," "Clarissa," I interrupted, my voice taking on the firm tone I'd once used when she was testing boundaries as a child. You've made it very clear that Rosewood Manor isn't suitable for your wedding ceremony. You've chosen a venue that better reflects your social aspirations and family connections. That's absolutely your right, and I respect your decision. I paused, letting that sink in before continuing. But you can't have it both ways. You can't reject my venue as inadequate for your important celebration and then expect me to treat it as a consolation prize available at family discount rates for your less important events. The silence that followed was charged with the kind of tension that comes when someone realizes their strategy has backfired completely. When Clarissa spoke again, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. You're really going to make me choose between having my rehearsal dinner at Rosewood Manor or being able to afford it? I'm not making you choose anything, I corrected. I'm offering you the same opportunity I offer every client, to book our venue at our standard rates for our standard level of service. If that doesn't fit your budget or expectations, there are many other excellent venues that might be more suitable for your needs. What followed was the sound of muffled conversation, Preston's voice mixing with Clarissa's in what was clearly a heated discussion about money, expectations, and family obligations. When she returned to the phone, her tone had shifted from pleading to something approaching anger. Fine, she said curtly. If that's how you want to handle this, we'll find somewhere else for the rehearsal dinner. Somewhere that values family relationships over profit margins. That's certainly your choice, I replied evenly. I'm sure you'll find something lovely that fits your budget and vision. Don't pretend you're not enjoying this, she snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. Don't pretend you're not getting some kind of satisfaction from making your own daughter's wedding more difficult and expensive. The accusation hit harder than I'd expected, not because it was accurate, but because it revealed how thoroughly Clarissa had misunderstood both my motivations and my position. She genuinely believed that maintaining professional standards was somehow vindictive, that expecting fair compensation for premium services was about punishment rather than principle. Clarissa, I said quietly, I've spent 20 years building something extraordinary. Rosewood Manor isn't just a business. It's a testament to what's possible when you refuse to accept other people's limitations on your dreams. Every couple who celebrates here receives the same level of excellence, the same attention to detail, the same commitment to making their day perfect. I took a breath, choosing my next words carefully. I won't compromise those standards, not even for family. Especially not for family, because maintaining excellence is how I've created something worthy of respect, something that deserves to be valued rather than taken for granted. So that's it? She asked, her voice thick with tears I could hear but not see. You're going to let your pride destroy our relationship over a party venue? My pride? I repeated, feeling the sharp edge of real anger for the first time in our conversation. Clarissa, you've spent months dismissing my life's work as unsuitable for your wedding, accepting your future mother-in-law's assessment that what I've built isn't refined enough for your social circle. You've allowed my professional expertise to be ignored in favor of connections and credentials that have nothing to do with actual competence. My voice remained steady, but the words carried 20 years of accumulated frustration. And now you're upset because I won't offer you a discount on services you've already decided aren't good enough for your important day. You want to know about pride? It's not pride that's driving my decisions. It's self-respect. Something I should have insisted on months ago. The silence that followed stretched so long, I began to wonder if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I never said Rosewood Manor wasn't good enough. You didn't have to say it, I replied gently. Every choice you've made has said it for you. The vendor dismissals, the planning exclusions, the venue selection, all of it has sent a very clear message about how you value what I've built and what I've contributed to your life. That's not, I didn't mean, she started, but seemed unable to find words that could bridge the gap between her intentions and her actions. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, I said, and I meant it. But impact matters more than intention, sweetheart. And the impact of your choices has been to treat me like an embarrassing relative to be managed. rather than a successful woman whose achievements deserve respect. Another long pause, filled with the weight of truths that couldn't be unsaid. "So what happens now?" she asked finally. "Now you plan your wedding at the venues and with the vendors who meet your standards," I replied. "And I continue running my business according to the principles that made it successful. If those two things can coexist respectfully, then we'll find our way forward as a family. If not—" I didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung between us like a bridge neither of us was quite ready to cross. "I need to think about all of this," Clarissa said eventually. "That's probably wise," I agreed. "These are important decisions that deserve careful consideration." After she hung up, I sat in my bedroom overlooking the gardens, where hundreds of couples had promised to love each other forever, where I'd watched my daughter play as a child, where I'd built something beautiful enough to host other people's most precious moments. For the first time in months, I felt no urge to compromise my standards or apologize for my success. If Clarissa wanted a relationship with me, it would be with the woman who had earned every achievement in her life, not with some diminished version who begged for inclusion in celebrations that should have honored what we'd built together. The power dynamic between us had finally shifted, and there was no going back. 3 days passed without any communication from Clarissa, a silence that spoke volumes about the impact of our conversation. I used that time productively, confirming the Morrison family's booking for August 15th and finalizing details for a tech entrepreneur's daughter, whose celebration would showcase Rosewood Manor's capabilities to exactly the kind of innovative, successful families that understood the difference between earned achievement and inherited privilege. The first shot in what I can only describe as the Blackthorne family's counteroffensive came Thursday morning, delivered through the most civilized weapon in their arsenal, the Grandview Herald Society columnist, Penelope Ashworth. The item appeared in her weekly About Town column, nestled between updates on charity galas and country club renovations. Local wedding planning has taken an unfortunate turn toward commercialism, with some venue owners prioritizing profit over family relationships. Sources close to several prominent families report being subjected to aggressive sales tactics and inflated pricing during what should be joyful celebration planning. Perhaps it's time for discerning families to remember that true elegance comes from understated grace rather than gaudy ostentation. The piece never mentioned Rosewood Manor by name, but anyone familiar with the local wedding industry would understand exactly which venue was being targeted. More troubling was the phrase gaudy ostentation, a calculated insult designed to undermine everything I'd built by suggesting that visible success was somehow vulgar compared to the Blackthorns' more refined approach to wealth. Within hours, my assistant Rebecca was fielding calls from reporters asking for comment on the controversies surrounding high-end wedding venue pricing. 3 potential clients called to postpone scheduled tours, citing concerns about, quote, recent negative publicity. The attack was surgical in its precision, designed to damage my reputation within the specific social circles that provided our most lucrative bookings without creating obvious legal liability for defamation. I was reviewing damage control strategies when my phone rang with a call from Marcus Chen, an old friend who owned the most successful catering company in the tri-state area. We'd worked together on dozens of events over the years, building the kind of professional relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. "Catherine," he said without preamble, "I just heard something disturbing from the Pemberton Hotel's catering director. Thought you should know what's being said in industry circles." "I'm listening," I replied, though I had a sinking feeling about what he might have heard. "Word is spreading that you've become difficult to work with, and that your pricing has become, quote, unreasonable for the market. The story going around is that you quoted $18,000 for a simple rehearsal dinner, and became hostile when questioned about the charges. The distortion was masterful. My professional presentation of standard pricing had been transformed into unreasonable demands. My refusal to offer family discounts reframed as general hostility toward clients. The industry whisper network was being weaponized against me with the kind of strategic precision that suggested professional guidance. Marcus, you've worked with me for 15 years. Do those accusations sound consistent with my business practices? Of course not, which is why I'm calling. But, Catherine, perception becomes reality in our industry. If enough people start believing you've changed your approach to client relations, it could seriously impact your bookings, especially among the social circles that expect preferential treatment. After hanging up with Marcus, I realized the Blackthorns weren't just trying to pressure me into compliance. They were attempting to systematically undermine my business relationships. This wasn't about wedding planning anymore. It was about demonstrating the consequences of refusing to accommodate their expectations. The next attack came through Rebecca's college roommate, who worked at a prominent public relations firm in Grandview. She called with a warning that someone had approached her company about developing, quote, crisis management strategies for families dealing with vendor disputes during wedding planning. The consultation had specifically mentioned Rosewood Manor and suggested that aggressive social media campaigns might be necessary to protect families from unfair treatment. I spent that evening researching the Blackthorn family's business connections, discovering a network of influence that extended far beyond what I'd initially understood. Preston Sr. served on the boards of 3 major corporations, 2 charitable foundations, and the Regional Tourism Authority. Constance chaired committees for the Art Museum, Children's Hospital, and Historic Preservation Society. Their social network included newspaper publishers, television station owners, and the kind of business leaders who could quietly influence everything from bank lending policies to municipal permits. For the first time since this conflict began, I felt a flutter of genuine concern. My business success had always been built on reputation, referrals, and the kind of word-of-mouth marketing that comes from consistently exceeding client expectations. If the Blackthorns could systematically poison those relationships, they could potentially destroy what I'd spent 20 years building. But concern wasn't the same as fear, and I'd learned long ago that the best defense against bullying, whether from playground tormentors or entitled social climbers, was often a strategic offense that exposed their vulnerabilities. Friday morning brought unexpected reinforcement in the form of a phone call from Eleanor Morrison, matriarch of the tech fortune family whose daughter's wedding we'd just booked for August 15th. Eleanor was calling from her vacation home in Tuscany, where she'd been following the Grandview Herald online. "Catherine, dear," she said with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to cutting through nonsense, "I just read the most ridiculous item in that dreadful society column. Someone's spreading rumors about your business practices. And I wanted to assure you that the Morrison family stands firmly behind Rosewood Manor's reputation for excellence." "I appreciate your support, Eleanor," I replied, genuinely touched by her unexpected call. "More than support. I'm furious," she continued. "My daughter specifically chose your venue after touring 8 others because of your attention to detail and professional standards. The suggestion that maintaining those standards somehow constitutes aggressive sales tactics is absolutely preposterous." Eleanor's voice took on the steel that had helped her build a tech empire from a garage startup. "I've asked my publicity team to reach out to several business journals about featuring successful women entrepreneurs in the wedding industry. Your story, building Rosewood Manor from an abandoned mansion into a premier destination, deserves recognition rather than vindictive gossip from people who've never created anything more challenging than a charity luncheon seating chart." The conversation lasted another 20 minutes, during which Eleanor shared insights about managing public relations challenges that proved invaluable. More importantly, she connected me with her media contacts and offered to serve as a character reference for any journalists investigating the controversy. By noon, I had received similar calls from 4 other longtime clients who had seen the Herald article and wanted to express their support. Dr. Amanda Foster, whose daughter's wedding had been featured in 3 national magazines, offered to write letters to industry publications defending my professional reputation. The Yamamoto family, whose tech company had been the subject of recent IPO speculation, suggested featuring Rosewood Manor in their upcoming Corporate Social Responsibility Report as an example of ethical business practices. The pattern was clear. The Blackthorns had assumed their social connections would be sufficient to isolate and pressure me into compliance. What they hadn't anticipated was that my client base included families whose influence and resources matched or exceeded their own, but who valued achievement over inheritance, innovation over tradition, and professional excellence over social pedigree. That afternoon, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Instead of continuing to play defense against their whisper campaign, I was going to take the offensive. If the Blackthorns wanted to make this conflict public, I would ensure the full story reached the right audiences. I called my attorney, Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in business litigation and had successfully defended several high-profile entrepreneurs against defamation campaigns. After reviewing the Herald article and Marcus's reports about industry rumors, Jennifer confirmed what I suspected. The attacks were carefully crafted to skirt legal liability while maximizing reputational damage. They're sophisticated, Jennifer admitted, but they've made one crucial mistake. By involving industry publications and business networks, they've moved this conflict into professional territory, where your achievements and reputation carry more weight than their social connections. We spent the rest of the afternoon developing a comprehensive response strategy. Jennifer would handle legal communications, ensuring that any further defamatory statements would trigger immediate cease and desist orders. Meanwhile, I would work with Eleanor Morrison's media contacts to proactively tell my story, not as a victim of family conflict, but as a successful entrepreneur whose professional standards had attracted both loyal clients and envious competitors. The Morrison family's publicity team proved remarkably efficient. By evening, I had confirmed interviews with 2 business journals and a lifestyle magazine that focused on women entrepreneurs in traditionally male-dominated industries. The articles would profile my transformation of Rosewood Manor and highlight client testimonials about our service standards, a positive narrative that would preempt any further attempts to question my business practices. But the most satisfying development came through Rebecca, who mentioned that several industry colleagues had reached out after hearing rumors about my supposed difficult behavior. Without exception, they had expressed disbelief and offered support, sharing their own positive experiences working with Rosewood Manor. Mrs. Winters, Rebecca said as we reviewed responses to the day's crisis management efforts, I think the Blackthorns might have underestimated how well-respected you are in professional circles. The people trying to damage your reputation don't actually work in this industry. They just assume their social connections are more important than your professional relationships. She was right. The Blackthorns had approached this conflict from a position of inherited privilege, assuming that social pressure and whisper campaigns would be sufficient to force my compliance. They understood how to navigate country club politics and charity board dynamics, but they had no experience with the kind of business relationships built on performance, reliability, and mutual professional respect. As I locked up Rosewood Manor that evening, walking through ballrooms where hundreds of couples had celebrated their most important moments, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole conflict began: confidence in my ability to not just survive their attacks, but to emerge stronger than before. The Blackthorns had declared war on my reputation and livelihood. They were about to discover that the woman who had built an empire from an abandoned mansion wasn't easily intimidated by people whose greatest achievement was being born into the right family. The Grandview Business Excellence Awards Gala was the kind of event where Millbrook Heights' most successful entrepreneurs gathered to celebrate achievement and network among equals. I had been nominated for the Entrepreneur of the Year award 3 times over the past decade, finally winning 2 years earlier for my expansion of Rosewood Manor into a premier destination that drew clients from 5 states. This year, I wasn't nominated. I was presenting the Innovation in Hospitality Award to a young restaurateur who had revolutionized farm-to-table dining in our region. The invitation to present had come from the awards committee chair, Dr. Patricia Ng, whose software company had chosen Rosewood Manor for their corporate events precisely because we understood the needs of tech industry professionals. I selected my outfit with strategic care, a midnight blue silk dress that photographed beautifully and conveyed both sophistication and confidence, paired with the diamond necklace I'd bought myself after our first $1 million revenue year. This wasn't about displaying wealth. It was about projecting the image of a woman who had earned every success through her own efforts. The Fairmont Grand Ballroom was packed with the region's business elite, a crowd that included several of my longtime clients but also, inevitably, the Blackthorne family. I spotted them near the bar, Preston Sr. holding court with several bank executives while Constance worked the room with her characteristic blend of charm and calculation. Clarissa and Preston III stood slightly apart, both looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested their relationship might be experiencing some strain. The cocktail hour proceeded smoothly, with numerous colleagues and clients approaching to congratulate me on the positive coverage Rosewood Manor had received in recent business publications. Eleanor Morrison's media strategy had proven remarkably effective. The 3 articles published over the past week had positioned me as a role model for women entrepreneurs, emphasizing my transformation of an abandoned property into a thriving business while highlighting testimonials from satisfied clients. "Catherine!" Dr. Amanda Foster appeared at my elbow, champagne flute in hand and expression bright with vindication. "Did you see the piece in Regional Business today? They featured your quote about maintaining professional standards regardless of personal relationships." Brilliant positioning. Before I could respond, I noticed a shift in the crowd's energy. Conversations were becoming more focused, voices dropping to the conspiratorial tones that suggested something noteworthy was happening. Following the direction of several gazes, I saw Constance Blackthorne approaching with the purposeful stride of someone who had decided to address a problem publicly. "Catherine," she said loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause, "how lovely to see you here. I was just telling the Pemberton Hotel's event coordinator how much we're looking forward to working with them for Clarissa's wedding. It's so important to choose vendors who understand the significance of family celebrations, don't you think?" The opening gambit was expertly crafted, a public reminder that my venue had been rejected for Clarissa's wedding, designed to embarrass me in front of professional colleagues, while positioning the Blackthorns as the reasonable party in our conflict. "Absolutely," I replied with a warm smile, accepting the challenge. "Family celebrations deserve venues that reflect the values and achievements being honored. I'm sure the Pemberton will provide exactly the level of service that meets your expectations." The subtle emphasis on "your expectations" wasn't lost on anyone listening. I was suggesting that different families had different standards, and that the Blackthorns had chosen a venue that matched their particular requirements. Constance's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, some families prioritize tradition and social standing over commercial considerations. "How fortunate that they have that luxury," I responded smoothly. "Those of us who built our success from the ground up tend to appreciate venues that understand the value of hard work and earned achievement. It creates such a meaningful backdrop for celebrating life's milestones." The conversation was being conducted in the polite, coded language of high society warfare, but the underlying message was clear to everyone within earshot. Constance was dismissing my business as merely commercial, while I was positioning her family's inherited wealth as unearned privilege. Dr. NG, who had been observing this exchange with the sharp attention of someone who recognized a significant moment, chose this opportunity to intervene. "Catherine, I was hoping to introduce you to Marcus Webb from the State Tourism Board. He's been following your success story and wanted to discuss featuring Rosewood Manor in their economic development materials." Marcus Webb, a distinguished gentleman in his 60s, stepped forward with the kind of smile that suggested he'd been briefing on the situation and was delighted to participate in my strategic positioning. "Ms. Winters," he said, shaking my hand with obvious enthusiasm, "your transformation of that abandoned Victorian mansion has become a case study in our rural economic development programs. We're particularly impressed by how you've attracted destination wedding tourism to the region. The economic impact studies show significant benefits for local businesses." I could see Constance processing this information, realizing that my little business was being recognized at the state level for its economic contribution to the region. This wasn't the narrative she'd been trying to promote about my supposed inadequacy or questionable business practices. The numbers are quite remarkable, Marcus continued, clearly enjoying his role in this public education moment. Rosewood Manor events generate an estimated $2.3 million annually in local spending, hotel bookings, restaurant visits, retail purchases, plus the employment impact of 37 full-time positions. It's exactly the kind of entrepreneurial success story we love to highlight. The crowd around us had grown larger, drawn by the obvious tension and the unexpected business discussion. I could see several journalists from local publications taking notes, recognizing that something newsworthy was developing. "That's fascinating," said Richard Harrison, Blake's father, who had apparently been listening from a nearby conversation. "Though I suppose there's always the question of sustainability. Wedding venues can be so dependent on social trends and economic fluctuations." The comment was clearly intended to undermine confidence in my business model, but it revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what I'd built. I smiled at him with genuine warmth. "You're absolutely right about market volatility," I agreed. "That's why successful venues focus on consistent quality and client satisfaction, rather than relying on social connections or inherited customer bases. When your business depends on performance rather than pedigree, you develop resilience that serves you well during challenging periods." Dr. Foster, who had been watching this exchange with obvious delight, chose this moment to add her own perspective. "Speaking of performance, Richard, your daughter Blake mentioned at the country club that you're planning to expand your real estate firm into luxury hospitality properties. Have you considered studying Catherine's model? The transformation of Rosewood Manor might provide valuable insights for your development projects." The suggestion that Richard Harrison might learn from my experience was deliciously inflammatory, implying that my business acumen could benefit someone who clearly considered himself my social superior. His expression suggested he was beginning to understand that this conversation wasn't proceeding as his allies had planned. "Perhaps," he said stiffly, "though our projects typically focus on established markets rather than experimental venues." "Experimental?" Marcus Webb's eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "Mr. Harrison, Rosewood Manor has been booked solid for the past 5 years. The waiting list extends 18 months, and client satisfaction surveys consistently rate the experience as exceptional. Those aren't experimental results, they're industry benchmarks." I watched as the crowd dynamics shifted around us. What had begun as Constance's attempt to publicly embarrass me had transformed into an impromptu business presentation highlighting my achievements. The professionals in our audience, entrepreneurs, executives, and industry leaders, were clearly impressed by the economic impact data and performance metrics being discussed. More importantly, the contrast between earned achievement and inherited privilege was becoming impossible to ignore. While the Blackthorns and their allies tried to dismiss my success through veiled references to social standing and tradition, the actual business community was celebrating concrete results and measurable impact. "Catherine," Dr. NG announced, checking her watch, "we should probably head toward the ballroom for the awards presentation. I believe you're presenting the Innovation and Hospitality Award in 10 minutes. As we began moving toward the main ballroom, I noticed Clarissa standing near the entrance, having witnessed at least part of the public exchange between her future family and mine. Her expression was troubled, though whether from embarrassment about the conflict or recognition of how her mother's achievements were being publicly validated, I couldn't tell. Our eyes met briefly across the crowd, and for a moment I saw something that looked like regret, or perhaps simply exhaustion from the ongoing tension that was affecting everyone involved. But before either of us could acknowledge the moment, Preston appeared at her side, guiding her toward their assigned table, with the protective gesture of someone shielding his fiancée from further uncomfortable situations. As I walked toward the stage to present an award recognizing innovation and excellence in my own industry, I realized that the public confrontation had accomplished something unexpected. Instead of damaging my reputation as the Blackthorns had intended, it had provided a platform to demonstrate the respect I'd earned among actual business leaders and the concrete impact of what I'd built. The woman who had once begged for inclusion in her daughter's wedding planning was gone. In her place stood someone who commanded respect in professional circles, whose achievements spoke louder than any social pedigree, and who no longer needed permission from anyone to claim her rightful place among the region's most successful entrepreneurs. The war wasn't over, but tonight's battle had shown everyone present exactly who was winning. The aftermath of the awards gala unfolded with the swift precision of dominoes falling in a carefully orchestrated pattern. By Monday morning, 3 separate business publications had requested follow-up interviews about Rosewood Manor's economic impact, and the State Tourism Board had formally invited me to participate in their upcoming Economic Development Summit as a featured speaker on rural entrepreneurship. More significantly, my assistant Rebecca reported that our booking inquiries had increased by 40% over the weekend, with several specifically mentioning the positive coverage from the business journals. Families who valued achievement over ancestry were discovering that Rosewood Manor represented exactly the kind of success story they wanted associated with their celebrations. The Blackthorn response came Tuesday afternoon, delivered through the most unexpected messenger possible, Clarissa herself, who appeared at Rosewood Manor without advance notice, looking exhausted and considerably less polished than I'd seen her since her engagement began. She found me in the conservatory, reviewing floral arrangements for that weekend's Morrison celebration, an elaborate affair that would showcase our capabilities to 300 guests, including several politicians, tech executives, and at least 2 venture capital firms whose principals had expressed interest in our expansion plans. "Mom," she said quietly from the doorway, "we need to talk." I looked up from the hydrangea samples I'd been examining, taking in her rumpled appearance and red-rimmed eyes. This wasn't the composed young woman who had been dismissing my professional achievements for months. This was my daughter, clearly struggling with something that had shaken her confidence. "Of course," I replied, setting down my notes and giving her my full attention. "What's on your mind?" She moved into the room slowly, as if afraid her presence might shatter something fragile. "I watched what happened at the awards gala Saturday night. I heard what people were saying about you, about Rosewood Manor, about everything you've built here." I waited, recognizing that she was working towards something important and didn't want to interrupt her process. "Preston's mother has been telling me for months that your business practices were questionable, that maintaining such hands-on involvement in operations suggested you hadn't really achieved the kind of success that would allow you to step back and delegate, like truly wealthy families do." The admission hung between us, finally giving voice to the assumptions that had been driving so many of her recent decisions. I felt a mixture of hurt and relief, hurt that she had believed such assessments, but relief that she was finally articulating what had been unspoken. "And now?" I asked gently. Clarissa sank into one of the conservatory's antique chairs, looking smaller than her 25 years. "Now I've spent 3 days watching Preston's family scramble to contain the damage from Saturday night. Constance has been making frantic phone calls to everyone who witnessed that conversation, trying to clarify her comments and manage what she keeps calling the narrative." She looked up at me with something approaching wonder. "Mom, I've never seen her rattled before. She prides herself on always being in control of social situations, always knowing exactly what to say and how to position things. But she had no idea how to handle being publicly outmaneuvered by someone she'd consistently underestimated." I continued arranging flowers, giving her space to process whatever realizations were driving this conversation. Preston's father spent Sunday morning reading every article about Rosewood Manor he could find online. He kept muttering about, quote, "due diligence" and missed opportunities, and asking Preston why no one had properly researched your business credentials before dismissing the venue. The image of Preston Sr. conducting belated research on my achievements was both satisfying and sad. Satisfying because it confirmed his family's miscalculations. Sad because it had taken public embarrassment for them to recognize what should have been obvious from the beginning. "There's more," Clarissa continued, her voice becoming smaller. "Blake's father called Preston yesterday, Apparently, several families are reconsidering their business relationships with the Harrison real estate firm after hearing about their dismissive comments regarding local entrepreneurs. Blake said his father was, a being associated with people who don't support regional economic development. I set down the flowers I'd been arranging, finally understanding the full scope of what had transpired. The Blackthorns' attempt to diminish my reputation had backfired so completely that it was now affecting their own social and business relationships. In a region increasingly focused on innovation and entrepreneurship, being perceived as hostile to successful business owners was a significant liability. "Clarissa," I said carefully, "what are you telling me?" She took a shaky breath before answering. "I'm telling you that I've spent the past year allowing people who don't understand your achievements to convince me that they weren't valuable. I'm telling you that I let my desire to fit into Preston's social circle override my judgment about my own mother's character and capabilities." The words carried the weight of months of accumulated tension and misunderstanding. I could see her struggling to find language for realizations that were reshaping her understanding of everything that had happened between us. "I'm also telling you," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "that Preston and I have been talking seriously about what kind of foundation we want to build our marriage on. Whether we want to start our life together by rejecting the achievements and values that actually created the opportunities we've been privileged to enjoy." She stood up and moved to the windows overlooking the gardens where she'd played as a child, where hundreds of couples had made promises about building lives together based on love and mutual respect. "We want to book Rosewood Manor for our wedding," she said simply, "not because we can't afford the Pemberton Hotel, not because Constance has finally been pressured into accepting your venue, but because this is where we should have planned to celebrate from the beginning." The request hit me harder than I'd expected. After months of feeling dismissed and undervalued, after fighting to maintain my professional standards against family pressure, after rebuilding my confidence in the wake of systematic attempts to undermine my reputation, after all of that, my daughter was asking to come home. "Clarissa," I said softly, "booking Rosewood Manor for your wedding isn't going to solve the deeper issues between us. It's not going to erase months of feeling like my life's work was somehow embarrassing to you, or repair the damage from being excluded from planning decisions, because my professional expertise was considered inferior to social connections." She turned from the window to face me, tears flowing freely now. "I know that. I know I can't undo the hurt I've caused by letting other people's opinions matter more than our relationship. I know that saying I'm sorry isn't sufficient to address the patterns that led us here." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture that reminded me of the little girl who used to help me arrange flowers for other people's celebrations. "But Mom, I also know that getting married anywhere other than Rosewood Manor would be starting my marriage with a lie. It would be pretending that my family's achievements and values aren't worth celebrating, that the foundation you built for our lives isn't strong enough to support the next generation." I studied my daughter's face, seeing past the designer clothes and professional makeup to recognize the young woman who was finally ready to make choices based on her own values rather than other people's expectations. "The August 15th date is already booked," I said quietly. "The Morrison family celebration is that weekend." Clarissa nodded, having clearly anticipated this reality. "Preston and I talked about that. We're prepared to wait until you have an opening that works with your schedule. We'd rather have our wedding here when it's convenient for Rosewood Manor than compromise by celebrating somewhere else." The reversal was complete and startling. Instead of demanding accommodation to their preferred timeline, they were offering to adjust their plans to fit my business schedule. Instead of expecting family discounts or special treatment, they were requesting the privilege of booking our venue according to our standard terms and availability. "There's a September 21st date available," I said after consulting my mental calendar. "A Saturday evening, perfect weather, and it would give us time to plan something truly exceptional." "September 21st sounds perfect," Clarissa replied immediately. "Whatever date works for you. Whatever pricing structure reflects the level of service we'll receive. Whatever planning timeline ensures we're not disrupting your other commitments. We'll make it work." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw someone who had finally learned the difference between demanding accommodation and earning respect. Someone who understood that true partnership required mutual consideration rather than one-sided sacrifice. "All right," I said finally, "let's plan your wedding." The smile that broke across her face was the first genuine expression of joy I'd seen from her in months. Not the practiced happiness of someone performing for social approval, but the authentic delight of someone who had found her way back to what actually mattered. "There's just one condition," I added, watching her expression become attentive. "We plan this wedding together, as partners. Your vision, our expertise, mutual respect for each other's contributions. No outside interference, no social pressure to conform to other people's expectations. Just you, me, and creating something beautiful that reflects who you and Preston really are, rather than who other people think you should be." "Deal," she said without hesitation, extending her hand for a shake that transformed into the first real hug we'd shared since her engagement began. As I held my daughter in the conservatory where she'd learned to love beauty and attention to detail, where she'd watched me build something extraordinary from determination and vision, I realized that some victories are worth waiting for. Some relationships are worth fighting to preserve, even when the battle seems to be lost. The Blackthorns had inadvertently given us the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to choose each other again, this time based on genuine understanding rather than obligation or expectation. September 21st was going to be a very special day. 6 months later, I stood in the bridal suite at Rosewood Manor, watching my daughter prepare for her wedding day with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from making choices based on authentic values rather than external expectations. The September afternoon light streaming through the windows cast everything in golden warmth, and Clarissa looked radiant in a way that had nothing to do with professional makeup or designer gowns. The dress she'd chosen was nothing like the severe creation Constance had favored during that uncomfortable boutique appointment. This gown was flowing and romantic, with delicate lace details and fabric that moved like poetry when she walked, exactly the style we'd admired together during those magazine browsing sessions of her teenage years. She had chosen it herself, without committees or consultants, trusting her own instincts about what would make her feel beautiful on her wedding day. "Mom," she said, turning from the mirror where our hairstylist was adding final touches to her elegant updo, "I keep thinking about something you said months ago. About whether I'd be able to tell my future children that their grandmother built something beautiful and successful." I set down the pearl earrings I'd been preparing to offer her, my own mother's wedding jewelry, passed down through 3 generations of women who had worked for everything they achieved. "What conclusion did you reach?" I asked gently. She smiled, accepting the earrings and fastening them with steady hands. "That I want to tell them their grandmother transformed an abandoned mansion into something magical through vision, determination, and refusal to accept limitations others tried to place on her dreams. I want them to understand that true success comes from building something meaningful, rather than inheriting something impressive." Through the suite's windows, I could see guests arriving for the ceremony, a carefully curated group that represented the best of both families' values. The Blackthorns were present, though notably subdued in their interactions since the events of the past year had reshaped their understanding of social dynamics within their own circle. Preston Sr. had actually approached me the previous evening to express genuine appreciation for Rosewood Manor's accommodations and to compliment our staff's professionalism. More meaningful to me were the faces I recognized from my professional community: Eleanor Morrison and her family, Dr. Amanda Foster with her husband, Marcus Chen representing the regional hospitality industry, and dozens of clients whose celebrations I'd been privileged to coordinate over the years. These were people who understood the difference between earned achievement and inherited privilege, who valued substance over status. The planning process over the past 6 months had been everything I'd hoped it could be when Clarissa first got engaged. We worked as true partners, blending her artistic vision with my operational expertise to create something uniquely beautiful. Preston proved to be a thoughtful collaborator, more interested in ensuring Clarissa's happiness than impressing social observers. Even Constance had eventually adapted to the new dynamic, though her interactions with me remained formally polite rather than genuinely warm. Most importantly, Clarissa had reclaimed ownership of her own celebration. Every choice reflected her personality and values. The music selection that included both classical pieces and contemporary songs meaningful to her relationship with Preston. The menu that balanced elegance with flavors she genuinely enjoyed. The floral arrangements that showcased garden roses from our own grounds rather than exotic imports chosen for social media impact. 5 minutes, ladies, called Rebecca from the doorway, her organizational skills ensuring that every element of the day flowed seamlessly. She had become invaluable during the wedding planning process, demonstrating the kind of attention to detail that made Rosewood Manor's reputation for excellence more than just marketing rhetoric. As I helped Clarissa with her veil, a simple cathedral-length piece that complemented rather than overwhelmed her natural beauty, I reflected on how dramatically our relationship had evolved. The woman preparing to walk down the aisle was confident in ways that had nothing to do with social positioning or family connections. She had learned to value authenticity over approval, substance over status, and genuine connection over strategic networking. "Are you ready?" I asked, stepping back to admire the complete picture of my daughter as a bride. "More than ready," she replied, picking up her bouquet of garden roses, peonies, and eucalyptus, flowers chosen for their meaning and beauty rather than their cost or rarity. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was too caught up in other people's expectations to appreciate what you'd given me." The walk down the main staircase felt like a journey through time, past photographs of hundreds of couples who had celebrated at Rosewood Manor, past architectural details I'd painstakingly restored, past crystal chandeliers that cast dancing light on walls that had witnessed decades of love stories beginning. Clarissa moved with grace and purpose, no longer performing for an audience but genuinely celebrating a moment she had crafted according to her own vision. The ceremony in our garden pavilion was everything a wedding should be: intimate despite the large guest count, meaningful despite the elegant surroundings, and authentic despite the months of complex preparation. Preston's vows spoke about building a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values, while Clarissa's promised to create a life together that honored both their individual achievements and their collective dreams. As I watched them exchange rings beneath the rose arbor where hundreds of couples had made similar promises, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The young woman standing at the altar was fundamentally different from the bride who had once dismissed my life's work as, quote, just a wedding venue. She had learned to see achievement through her own eyes rather than through the lens of social expectations. During the reception, as guests danced in the ballroom where this whole conflict had reached its breaking point, I found myself in conversation with Dr. Patricia N. Gee, who had become both a valued client and a trusted friend during the tumultuous months of family drama. "Catherine," she said, raising her champagne flute in a small toast, "watching Clarissa tonight, seeing how confident and grounded she is, this is what success really looks like. Not the money or the property or the business achievements, impressive as they are, but raising a daughter who learned to value substance over status." I looked across the dance floor where Clarissa and Preston swayed to music that meant something to them personally rather than something chosen to impress their guests. Her face glowed with genuine happiness, the kind that comes from making choices aligned with your authentic values rather than your social ambitions. "She had to learn those lessons herself," I replied. "I could provide the foundation and the example, but she had to choose what kind of woman she wanted to become." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed with expressions of genuine appreciation for the celebration they'd witnessed, I found myself alone in the ballroom that had been the site of so much conflict and eventual reconciliation. The space looked perfect, elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated without being intimidating, beautiful in ways that enhanced rather than overshadowed the human connections it had hosted. Rebecca appeared with the final vendor payments and guest comment cards, evidence of another flawlessly executed event that would enhance Rosewood Manor's reputation and generate referrals for years to come. But more than business success, tonight represented something deeper, proof that relationships built on genuine respect and shared values could survive even the most challenging tests. "Mrs. Winters," Rebecca said, gathering the last of the evening's paperwork, "I've never seen a bride look happier, or a mother look more proud." She was right. The woman who had once been called a nuisance for her involvement in wedding planning had been transformed into the proud mother of a bride who valued her achievements enough to celebrate among them. The venue that had been dismissed as insufficiently prestigious was now recognized as the perfect setting for a couple confident enough to choose substance over status. 6 months ago, when Clarissa had stood in this same ballroom and called Rosewood Manor just a wedding venue, I had felt diminished and dismissed. Tonight, as I turned off the lights and locked the doors of my beautiful, successful, meaningful life's work, I understood that some transformations take time, some victories require patience, and some relationships are worth fighting to preserve. The woman who had built an empire from an abandoned mansion had raised a daughter who finally understood the difference between inherited privilege and earned achievement. The mother who had been called a nuisance had helped plan a wedding that celebrated authentic love over social positioning. Most importantly, the family who had nearly been torn apart by other people's expectations had chosen each other again, this time based on genuine understanding and mutual respect. Standing in the moonlight outside Rosewood Manor, surrounded by gardens where my daughter had played as a child and celebrated as a bride, I realized that true worth isn't determined by other people's assessments. It's demonstrated through the courage to build something meaningful and the wisdom to never apologize for your achievements. I had never been a nuisance, I had always been extraordinary. It had just taken everyone else, including my own daughter, some time to catch up with what I'd known about myself all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.